Greetings, kindred spirits. As promised, I have done a separate podcast regarding the retrograde planets and the upcoming Saturn Pluto conjunction. I did do a live transmission with Katharine Kinnie from Cosmic Numerology back in February, and I will post the link to that in the description box below. We will actually be doing another live transmission again soon regarding these transits and more, since we are both in agreement that these transits, together with key numerological dates, makes 2019 and 2020 very important, if not spectacular years. But I wanted to do this podcast separately because I know a few of you like to come back and listen to certain points of interest. Although the live transmissions I do with Katharine do hold a bundle of enlightening information, and I would definitely recommend that you listen to them. Also, since they do cover a lot of ground. But I would just like to mention here that I feel a lot of us may have unfinished business from last summer, and that may resurface throughout these retrograde planets. You know, if it wasn't properly dealt with at that time, I would definitely say that's likely to surface in some form or way. So watch out for that. So Jupiter entered into Ophiuchus at the beginning of this year. You know, Jupiter started to retrograde through Ophiuchus on the 10th of April and began his retrograde mode at 16 degrees. Jupiter's energy will continue to be very strong and very magical whilst in Ophiuchus. You know, this is the energy of the magician. So we must be careful in what we wish for or what we are manifesting, because this energy manifests very quickly in Ophiuchus, you know, whether it's in retrograde or not. But of course, when planets are in retrograde, it does become more of a personal thing, you know, it's more of an inner reflection. Also, Jupiter retrograding through Ophiuchus will bring up a lot of reflection regarding past injustices and karmic cycles that have been based on selfishness or ego. This is also a time where we could be doing some deep soul searching regarding our belief systems, you know, especially around our spiritual views and our finances. Jupiter will be in square to Venus and Neptune, and the essence of this aspect will revolve around self-indulgence, attachments to the comforts in life, and self-centeredness. So much discipline will be needed to get creative rather than be materialistic. Jupiter retrograding through Ophiuchus is actually a very strong energy of the spiritual versus the material. The goddess Pallas will be in sextile to Jupiter too, so there will continue to be some great opportunities being presented to us for us to see the bigger picture with regards to finding solutions in solving some large-scale problems. And there's enough of those in the world, you know. So although this may not be the time to enforce them, we can keep them in mind and put them to use at a later date, which won't be that far away. So Jupiter will actually retrograde back to 6 degrees in Ophiuchus on the 10th of August, just before he shifts back into forward motion. So destiny will play a strong hand in the ending of this particular retrograde mode of Jupiter. This energy to me represents the luck dragon, although it is also a time where we need to trust our intuition as things continue to unfold, and even more so once the solar eclipse occurs on the 2nd of July. And if by that point we haven't already, then we will need to make peace with ourselves and the world, because the feminine energy will be very strong at this time, but also very demanding. especially when it comes to being self-reliant and wanting to get things done. So taking time out alone around this time would be a very good way to recharge our batteries, because once this time hits, it will be very active, especially for spiritual work and spiritual working groups. So Pluto started his retrograde mode on the 24th of April and was at 26 degrees in Sagittarius. But Jupiter's energy will still be very strong as well, since he is the ruling planet of Sagittarius. So they're going to be kind of working hand in hand. Because Jupiter is retrograding through Ophiuchus, this energy combined with Pluto's will be one of misunderstanding, especially with regards to spiritual practices. This energy will also be strongly influenced by the element of ether, which is Ophiuchus's element. Pluto is going to be pushing for soul growth, so will trigger the awakening process even more so than it already is. And I feel that throughout this time, many may experience astral projection, like outer body experiences and strong psychic awareness. The problem is, though, with the element of ether, is that we can be too much in our heads, so grounding techniques will be necessary, so we don't fly off with the fairies. But also we must beware of getting lost in the darkness, because this energy is also very deep. So it's likely that the events that occur will be very eye-opening, although we must try our best to rise above any negativity. By the time Pluto finishes his retrograde mode, he would have retreated back to 24 degrees. So the energy of Mars will be very strong, especially since Mars will be in trine to Pluto, which will create a very high energy level. Mars will be in Virgo, so situations that revolve around investigations to gain evidence for justice will be the theme and outcome for this Pluto retrograde. Saturn started his retrograde mode at 24 degrees in Sagittarius on the 29th of April, in an exact conjunction to the South Node. So this shows an energy that can be stuck in a judgmental attitude, or an energy that is highly opinionated, but doesn't necessarily practice what it preaches. This also shows a need for us to get grounded and focused on our own morals and opinions, but from a place of unconditional love. Also, Saturn has reached a close conjunction with Pluto at present. They are within 2 degrees of an exact conjunction. So Pluto is putting pressure on Saturn to be true to himself. And in retrograde mode, Saturn is creating an energy of deep reflection of the past, and his aim is to push us into reaching a level of higher consciousness. Firstly, to understand the mistakes that we have made in the past, and secondly, to work on correcting them. But this particular retrograde, with all the aspects and planet placements, does suggest that a further breakdown of old structures may be revealed. So in hindsight, when this retrograde process began, we started to see the signs of what the major events of the Pluto-Saturn exact conjunction in 2020 would involve. And I really do feel that the Notre Dame fire was one of those signs. Saturn would have retrograded back to 17 degrees when his retrograde process comes to an end on the 17th or 18th of September. And on this day there will be a kite, 3 T-squares, one of which will be a double, and 2 yods. So I feel that there will be a lot to process mentally and emotionally. That energy will be very triggering and draining under these aspects. But I feel a lot of truth would have surfaced by that time. And it could be for some an overwhelming and critical time. So this year, 2019, although a 3-year numerologically, is actually an ending of a grand cycle between Pluto and Saturn, and the new cycle will begin on the 12th of January 2020 when they come into another rare exact conjunction. You know, the last conjunction between these two planets was on the 7th of November 1982, and that one occurred in Virgo, which is an earth sign. You know, Virgo rules the 7th house of relationships, one-to-ones, either romantic or business in the true lifetime sky. And according to Walter Berg, who I refer to as the godfather of Ophiuchus, and, you know, actually Walter Berg was the original founder of the re-emergence of Ophiuchus and the 13th zodiac. You know, he realised from a very young age that there was a 13th constellation that sat on the Ecliptic. You know, Walter Berg is also an astronomer and a scientist. But he refers to Virgo in his book called The 13 Signs of the Zodiac as the analytical scientist, the statistician, teacher, technologist and private investigator. So after a brief look back to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 1982, I noted that apart from the chaos of war, disasters and austerity, which seems to be a continuous and monotonous cycle throughout history, that there was some interesting events that took place around those particular subjects. So on the 30th of January 1982, the first computer virus called the Elk Cloner was created by a 15-year-old schoolboy. On the 25th of February 1982, the European Court of Human Rights brought in the rule that teachers were no longer allowed to physically discipline their pupils. You know, that's crazy to think that that was actually happening. On the February 28th, the Adobe Systems was founded. Oh, and astronomically, excuse that traffic out there, and astronomically, we had the longest lunar eclipse of the 20th century that occurred on the 6th of July, lasting altogether 236 minutes, and 106 of those was the total lunar eclipse. You know, on August the 13th, health warnings on cigarette packets were made statutory in Hong Kong. And since Virgo is still considered the sign of the warrior, I thought that was relevant. On August the 17th, the first CDs were produced in Germany. On September the 21st, the first International Day of Peace was proclaimed by the United Nations. And I kind of wonder what happened to that. On the 1st of October, Sony launched the first consumer CD player, which was the model CDP-101. So, you know, some of you ancients out there may remember that. And don't worry, I'm a part of you all. And, you know, I had to mention this one. On November the 30th, Michael Jackson released his new album, Thriller. So also within this particular year regarding technology, smaller and cheaper electronic gadgets were being marketed to make people's lives easier, and genetic engineering also came into effect that year. You know, the Times Man of the Year in 1982 was the computer, and this was a year also that the Dutch elm disease destroyed millions of elm trees, and I actually remember that. And also where whales were reported of becoming, you know, an endangered species. But, you know, this is just a snippet of information I found for the year 1982. But I would, you know, if I was going to research it further, I would definitely research the previous year of 1981 and the post year 1983, just to get a clearer picture of how the lead up to this event, the year of the event itself, and of course the post event, on how things started to play out on a collective level, would be, quite interesting. Like I said, what I looked at here was just a snippet of information. So this Saturn-Pluto conjunction that takes place in January 2020 will be in the sign of Sagittarius, which is a fire element. And already we are seeing the effects of this, So, and I think we have for a little while actually, when we think about it, because I look at all the fires that were going on last year, look at all the volcanoes that have been rumbling away. And, now we're having breakouts of fires in temples and churches, and, it's just crazy stuff going on. And like I said, as Sagittarius's ruling planet is Jupiter and is retrograding for Ophiuchus, it does actually make these transits a little bit more important, since Ophiuchus does rule the 10th house of Christ consciousness, which also represents both the divine masculine and divine feminine energies, as well as it is also being the house of metaphysical gifts. But I will be discussing this more in the next live transmission that I'm doing with Katharine. And once we have organised a date for that, I will let you all know. But also I will be doing a separate podcast on all my research of Ophiuchus and the 10th house. And, my own chart wheel, my new chart wheel I had designed last August, I think it was, yeah. And it's all based on Walter Berg's calculations. So, I really do follow his work. So on closing, I would just like to mention that Saturn and Pluto are only 2 degrees apart at the present, which means that they are very close and have been since the 11th of April last month. They will start to separate again around the full moon on the 18th of May. But this is the closest they will come together this year, up until around the full moon on the 12th of December. And, at that point, they will only be 1 degree apart. And it will be the following month, in January, that the exact conjunction takes place. So, let's watch this space. And forgive me tumbling on my words as I'm coming towards the end of this podcast. It's been a long day. It's nearly 12 o'clock at night here in the UK. So I think I'm going to end it there. And I look forward to, uploading the horoscopes for you all in the next few days. I have got a little bit of a mad few days, so just bear with me. So, sending you all peace and much love.